Hi everyone, and welcome to our install video for the Rock Runner Series front bumper for the 3rd gen Toyota Tacoma. We're going to go through a list of parts that you're going to receive with your front bumper, so we're going to go ahead and get started with that real quick. First up, you're going to get your bumper center, bumper wings, one of those for each side. Then you'll get the cross member fill plate, lower bumper skid plate, aluminum fill panels for the front bumper, bumper support brackets, frame support brackets, and all of the associated hardware kits. So if you're getting your front bumper with the front lower cross member delete and the high clearance front skid plate, that is going to be a separate install video, and we recommend that you guys watch that first before this one, because as soon as you get this bumper assembled and you get ready to put it on the truck, you're going to need to know how to cut out your cross member and how to properly do that whole portion of the setup before installing your bumper onto the truck. So the following clips here are from one of our older install videos for our Hybrid and Overland Series front bumper for the Tacoma. These clips are going to show you how to remove your original front bumper, cut it, and prep everything to get ready to install the new bumper onto the truck.
Hi everyone, today we're working on the install of the 3rd gen Tacoma hybrid front bumper. So the first thing we need to start with, we're going to open the hood, and then we need to remove the grille from the vehicle. So the grille comes out pretty easily. There's just one plastic clip on each side here by the headlight, and 2 screws, one there, one there. The other plastic clip is right here by the headlight. So we're going to go ahead and pop those out first. And then you'll use a 10mm socket to remove the screws. Once those are removed, just lift up a little bit on the grill to get it off those plastic clips, and then you'll pull forward from the bottom and it just unclips from the bumper cover. Some might have Toyota safety sense, so you would have to disconnect. There's a connector here that usually plugs into the grill if you have Toyota safety sense, so you'll have to disconnect that before you pull the grill out. Next thing we're going to do is disconnect the fog light wiring harness, so that wire goes with the bumper. Next, you'll want to get this plastic clip out. You have to squeeze it from the bottom to remove it, and it'll pop up out of the hole. So once that's loose, you'll have to remove the rest of the plastic clips for the bumper cover. One here, and then we've got them across the steel trim here. All those plastic clips have to get removed. Just pop the head out just like the other ones by the grill. Pop the top up with a screwdriver, then remove the clip. So the next thing you need to do is remove the hardware from the inside of the fender well area that holds the fender flare and the bumper cover. There's a screw there, plastic clip here, and some screws along the bottom. So to remove the plastic clip, you just want to pry underneath it. Then you want to pry that plastic clip away from the flare and push it towards the inside of the fender well, just a little, so that it will disconnect from the fender flare. Then just use your 10mm socket to remove the rest of the screws. And there's one more plastic clip to remove on this side as well. The next thing we're going to do is put some marks on the plastic cover, bumper cover, so that we know where to put our masking tape to get ready for cutting. So the first mark we made is right down here, kind of at the top of this little ridge in the plastic. So we just made a straight line that comes out from there around the corner a little bit. And then there's two measurements that we're going to take and make a mark. So first one, we want to go 6 inches from this point straight down and make a mark on the plastic cover. And the next one we're going to do is 3 1/8 inches from this seam down to the edge of the flare. Okay, so those are our 3 marks that we want. Next thing we're going to do is grab a long piece of masking tape and lay it across those lines all the way across the fender flare as well. So we got our measurements marked out, and we laid our masking tape across the bumper, lined it up with our marks, and then we took a knife and just cut the tape right here, because next we're going to remove the bumper cover from the vehicle, and we want this tape to stay with the bumper and this piece to stay with the flare on the vehicle. So we did that, and then we peeled back the inner fender liner. You can just kind of pull on it and jam it behind the tire here just so it stays out of the way. And the next thing we need to do is disconnect the flare from the bumper cover so that we can get the cover out from behind it. So there's 2 plastic clips that are attached to the flare, one in somewhere in here and up there. They just have a flat tab that you push on it and then pull out away from the plastic, and it'll come out of there. So there's a little tab right here that you can push on like that, and it disconnects it from the plastic. So up above that there is these little small blue clips that go into the flare. So those are behind here. This end goes into a square hole in the fender. So you want to reach up in between behind there and pinch it together and pull it out of the fender at the same time. So you can at least get this first one unclipped, and the flare will move far enough to be able to get the bumper cover off of the truck. So now that the flare has been removed and it's loose, we're ready to take the bumper cover off. So there's just the cover itself kind of wraps around a bracket and just hooks onto the plastic behind it. So you'll want to get in behind here, and you have to peel the plastic bumper over that little spacer piece first, and then reach up from the back and just push on that cover so that it pops off of the clips there. It takes a pretty good amount of pressure to get it to break loose. So once those are popped loose on both sides, you should be able to just pull straight forward on the cover, and the entire cover will come off of the vehicle. So now we've removed the entire bumper cover from the truck, and we came around to the edges here. The next thing you want to do, since the fender flare was covering, this tape line on the vehicle, we just took another piece of tape and extended this line out all the way so we know where to cut. So that's the first thing you'll want to do, is add that piece of tape. And then next we're going to take apart the inside of the cover here. We're going to disconnect the fog light, take this screw out and actually pull the fog light out of the bumper. And then we're going to want to unclip all of these little plastic clips all the way around so that we can take this little fog light trim piece out, and then we'll go around, and you want to stick a screwdriver in between these and pry on them all the way around these clips here, across the inside, on the bottom and top, all the way around both sides, because we're going to remove this entire piece. So this entire unit will come out of the bumper cover, and then we'll do our cutting after that. The reason we take everything apart like this and remove it is because we're going to keep this upper portion of plastic that goes across and connects these two pieces, and everything else will come out. So this is going to stay, and we're going to install that back on the vehicle, and that's going to help give support to the grill once it goes back on. So we've got all of our plastic trim and the fog lights removed from the bumper cover. So now we're ready to cut the plastic. So we want to cut on this side of the tape, of course, down here along the bottom, all the way out. And as you come around the inside here, you kind of want to slope your cutting tool to go with the angle of this plastic right under here. So you want to cut at that angle and just remove these little pieces of the fog light bucket so those come off. And again, don't cut anything over here. We want to leave this piece attached to the center all the way across to this one. For this bumper, we're using just a regular 4.5-inch angle grinder with cutoff wheel to cut the plastic. There's multiple tools you could use, like a Dremel tool with a cutting wheel, or like an air saw or something like that. This is just what we have, and it works for us. The only thing is, because the grinder spins so fast, it'll kind of melt the plastic and leave some chunks on there you have to clean up afterwards. But the angle grinder does work pretty well. We just finished cutting our plastic bumper cover, and this is what it should look like after you've got the cutting done. You'll have this one piece connected from side to side there. So once that's done, you can clean up your edges, all the little chunks of plastic that are on there. You can use a knife to scrape along the edge, or just kind of like a buffing wheel on the grinder to clean it up a bit. Next thing you want to do is go back to the vehicle, and then you'll want to cut your fender flare off at the bottom of the tape line. Cut straight across. Now that the fender flare has been trimmed off, there's this plastic bracket underneath. This portion needs to be cut off as well, but it's attached to the fender, and we don't want to cut into the fender, so we're going to take this bracket off of the fender first to cut it. So we're just going to mark it with a piece of tape. Just put one on there, line it up right with the same area the flare was trimmed. And then we need to take this little red clip off right here. You can use a Phillips screwdriver, put it in the end, turn it just about a half turn, and it pops loose and the clip will come out. Then you'll use 10mm socket up top, and then that plastic bracket will come off the fender, and you can cut the end of it with your grinder or die grinder, whichever tool you were using before. So the plastic mounting bracket behind the flare has now been trimmed off. We reinstalled that piece. And the other thing we're going to do after that is take care of this extra fender liner material. So we just use a sharp blade on a box cutter knife, usually cuts through it really easily. So we're gonna cut from this corner along this line of the body through the plastic and discard all of that, and then whatever's left can be pushed up inside the fender well. And we usually use a couple of thread cutting or self-tapping screws with large washers to hold the plastic up inside the fender. You just want to make sure that when you put those screws in, that there's nothing in the way up above the screw, and that you're not going to puncture any holes into any wiring or anything in the engine bay up above. And the last little bit that may or may not need to be trimmed is this support bracket underneath the grill. It might be hanging down too far for some winches. We recommend using non-integrated winches, ones that you can mount the control box off to the side of the winch instead of directly on top. But if you need a little bit of room for your winch, you may have to trim this portion off right here so the winch can fit underneath, and then you'll need to mount your control box off to the side of the winch. So we've got our plastic fender liner all trimmed out. We ended up attaching it through an existing hole here with a 1/4 inch bolt and washers, and then we used a self-drilling screw with a washer to hold the plastic to the inside of the fender there, and then we used 2 self-drilling screws with washers on this side and just drill them right up into the inner fender there to hold the plastic in place. So that's been finished, and the other thing we did was trim out this grill support bracket for winch clearance. So that piece is now cleaned out. You probably want to spray the edge of that with some paint so it doesn't rust, and that stuff is all ready to go. Before we put the plastic back on below the headlights, we're going to want to remove this aluminum support bar that goes across the front of the frame. So you can either use a 14mm wrench, take these nuts off the outside and the one on the inside, or you can pop this plastic out, and then there's 14mm nuts on the inside here that you can get to with a socket and impact if you want to remove this piece first and then take these off. Either way, all of those parts need to be removed. So we've removed that aluminum support bar from the front of the frame. Next thing we need to take out is these pieces on the bottom here. Take this bolt out, then you want to remove the factory tow hook there too. Take those 2 bolts out. So we want to do that on both sides. Remove this bolt, take this piece out, and then we also want to take the hardware out for the power steering cooler. Remove this bolt and remove that bolt so the power steering cooler is loose. So when removing the hardware for the power steering cooler, you'll have to do those 2 bolts that bolt it to the frame here. Plus there's also another bolt that supports the line up on the side of the frame back inside there. So you can access that from the top of the frame rail. You can see the bolt right there. So we'll go into the fender well area, and it's going to be behind this rubber fender liner. That bolt right there, you'll want to remove that one, and then the power steering cooler will be able to slide back farther. So the power steering cooler has now been removed from the frame, and it's just sitting there loose. I'm going to show you how to relocate it and push it back closer to the radiator to make room for the winch. So the hardware kit that comes with the bumper provides 2 flat brackets, one labeled D for driver, P for passenger. Those brackets are going to get attached to the cooler first, and then we'll slide the cooler back in place and attach the brackets to the frame. So using the supplied 5/16 flange bolt and flange nut, attach the brackets to the power steering cooler. You'll want to just loosely install the bolts for now so that the bracket is adjustable. And now we're going to push the cooler back in place and bolt the brackets to the frame using the original bolts. And the other thing is you're going to want to make sure that these brackets are painted. Ours are not. We just grabbed some off the shelf for the install, but you want to make sure they are powder coated or painted before you install them, or they will end up rusting. So we've got the factory bolt back into the original threaded hole. You do that on both sides. And then you just want to make sure you push that power steering cooler back just far enough so it's not rubbing on the AC condenser here. You want just a little bit of clearance between there, and you want to make sure that the head of this bolt is not rubbing on the pipe there. Once you've got it adjusted appropriately, you can tighten down all of your hardware. Once your power steering cooler has been relocated, you can go ahead and reinstall the plastic portion that goes under the headlights. So we just put everything back to the original spot, clipped it back into that plastic piece, clip the fender flare in place, put all of your plastic clips back in by the headlight here across the top. And then if you have fog lights and you're using the original fog light wiring harness, you're going to want to plug that back together, push this clip into the support there, and then you've got the original wiring that you can use for fog lights there.
So the next thing you're going to want to do if you're installing a winch on your Rock Runner front bumper, we highly recommend using this Warn VR Series winch control pack relocation bracket for the Tacoma. So this is going to relocate your control pack up here behind the grill. Since this bumper is so small, there's no room for the control pack on top of the winch, so it needs to be relocated somewhere. So we're going to show you where this bracket goes real quick. Alright, so this is going to be the bottom of the bracket here with this little leg pointing towards the driver's side. We're going to use existing holes in the body of the vehicle down here to put the hardware through. So you just slide this bracket right down, line it up with these existing holes, and then you're going to use 1/4 by 3/4 bolts that are provided in the hardware kit with a flat washer on the front of the bolt, and then on the back side you're going to use these large fender washers and then a 1/4 inch nylock nut. So that's the hardware you'll use down in the bottom. So you can go ahead and put those in, and then you'll want to align this top bolt just to make sure that this hole lines up properly with this threaded hole. So that's another threaded existing hole there. You're going to use this M10 bolt and flat washer, so you can just thread that bolt in just enough to make sure it's aligned with the threads, so your bracket is where you need it to be. And then you're going to want to tighten the 2 bottom bolts and leave this top one loose, so that later on we have room to pull this bracket forward on the top and attach the control box to the bracket once you get the bumper up in place.
Now that our upper plastic is fully installed, we're ready to put the grill back on the vehicle. So you want to clip it in, align it with the slots at the bottom first, and then make sure the top pieces are, that these are on top of the headlight in this position, and these get hooked over the plastic piece there. And then you just need to install the 2 black plastic clips, one on each side, and then the 2 silver screws that we took out earlier from the middle of the grill.
Alright, so now the next thing you're going to want to do is refer to the PDF instructions that show how to assemble your Rock Runner front bumper. Those instructions are linked on the product page of our website, and you can go ahead and use those instructions to get your front bumper assembled now. So we've been working on the assembly of our front bumper here, and one thing to note, if you're not running a winch in your front bumper, you can install this aluminum fill plate just to kind of give a finished filled look in the center here. Obviously we left this one raw aluminum, but you can paint or powder coat that one to match the bumper as well. But when you're installing that, if you do need to mount a front license plate on your bumper as well, if you're using the C4 license plate mount, you'll want to install that at the same time as those aluminum plates. And if you're not using the aluminum plates, you'll also want to install that license plate mount when you do your winch and your fair lead and everything too at the same time. So in this case, with all the aluminum plates here, we're pinching it through in between. So we have this outer aluminum fill plate our 3/8 by 1 carriage bolts, and then we put our license plate mount in between, and then our rear fill plate, and sandwiched everything together and tightened it down. If you do not want to use a license plate mount like this, one that kind of is removable, you could also just take your flat plate and line up right in the center of this and drill 2 holes right through that aluminum, and then you could actually bolt your plate directly right to that aluminum filler piece as well if you'd like to do it that way. Now if you're installing a winch into your bumper, go ahead and put that in now. You can bolt that right down to the winch mounting plate that's integrated into the bumper. Another important thing to note that you don't want to miss, if you are not doing the cross member delete and you're going to be using this lower cross member fill plate, we need to take our 3/8 by 3/4 carriage head bolts, and we want to stick those in through these square holes in the back of the bumper here, and you want to put a piece of tape over them so that they stay in there in place and they're ready to go once you have to attach this fill plate from the front side after the bumper is on the truck. Okay, so next thing, before you put the bumper onto your truck, if you are doing the cross member delete and high clearance skid plate option, you'll want to go make sure you watch that video, do that process now, because you want to get your cross member cut out and do a few other things before moving on to putting the bumper onto the truck. So now we're ready to go ahead and get the Rock Runner bumper put on the front of the truck. Now we're going to use our company truck here that already has the bumper kind of loosely installed on it, just to reference a couple things here. Now if you're installing a winch into your bumper, the tricky part when you're getting the bumper put on the truck is to get the control pack fed up through behind the grill and mounted all at the same time as you're putting the bumper on. So really what you want to do there, you're going to need someone to help you, and you can use either a cart or something to set the bumper on, roll it up real close to the vehicle, or if you have a couple guys to help, they can hold the bumper in position. As you're real close to the truck, you want to take your winch control pack that's attached to the winch, or just attached to the bumper, I guess, hanging loosely, and you want to feed it up underneath this plastic piece here, behind the grill, all the way up and onto right to our winch control pack mount here. So that can just kind of sit in place as you get the bumper positioned on the truck. You can slide it on, put a couple of the mounting nuts and washers on just to hold the bumper loosely in place for now, and then you can get this control pack all mounted. So keep in mind as you're doing this, according to previously in the video, your grill will be already reinstalled on the truck. We just have this one off right now, but the grill will be installed on the truck, and you want it to be installed because once the bumper is bolted in place, you will not be able to put the grill in. So make sure your grill is in position, and then you're going to come inside here, and earlier on in the video, if you're installing a winch, we had our control pack relocation mount loosely installed. This top bolt we just had barely threaded in, but our bottom 2 bolts are completely tight because they are hard to access once the bumper is on. So we take this upper bolt out, and you're going to want to pull this bracket back to get some room to access the screws on the back of your control pack. So the control pack comes with those screws already on the back of it, and then we send some number 10 flat washers or little fender washers to go onto those screws because the holes in our bracket are large, so you have room for adjustment. You'll want to put those fender washers on the screws that came with the control pack, and then put those screws in through the back of the bracket and attach your control pack to the mount. Once that's all attached, then you can reinstall this M6 screw into the existing hole on the top and tighten that down. All right, so since this bumper is not getting a winch installed, we're going to go ahead and bolt it onto the truck real quick, just loosely. We're setting it in place here, and then using the original nut that came off of the stud along with one of our 3/8 grade 8 flat washers. And we just turn those on just far enough to hold the bumper in place for now. Okay, so we've gone ahead and adjusted our front bumper. We have about a 1/2 inch reveal around the sides here as far as gap between the bumper and the body, And the only bolts that we tightened to hold that in place, or the nuts, excuse me, were just these inside ones here, one on each side. So those are the only ones we have tight right now, holding the bumper adjusted right where we want it. We don't want to put any of the other nuts on yet because you'll just have to take them off again later to put the frame support brackets on. So next thing we're going to do is remove your factory skid plate or aftermarket if you have one. We need to get that out of the way so we can put this lower crossmember fill plate in. All right, so we've got the truck up in the air and we removed all of the hardware from the C4 front skid plate here except for the ones along across the very back. That's giving us enough ability to be able to pull the skid plate down, and then we'll be able to get our filler in between here. Now if you have a factory skid plate, you'll need to remove that. Plus there's two formed braces underneath there. You'll have to remove the bolts from the front crossmember and then loosen the back ones so that those braces can hang down just in a similar fashion as this skid plate is doing. And then we'll show you how to get this skid plate fill piece in position. All right, so we have our crossmember fill plate here with this bent flange facing down. We want to get that in between your skid plate and the crossmember here. So we need to pull the skid plate down, get the bottom in position here, and then this portion needs to slide up behind this mounting flange here on the bumper, so make sure it goes between that, and then you can hang it on those carriage bolts that we put in earlier. Now you want to use 3/8 flat washer and 3/8 flange nut and just loosely install those. Now we need to lift up this fill plate and your skid plate and reinstall the bolts along the bottom here. Tighten those down, and then you can tighten these carriage bolts up on the top here. Okay, so we have all of our hardware tightened down for this crossmember fill plate here. Our skid plate is back in position and all tightened down. Now we're going to put this lower bumper skid plate on using these 1/4 by 5/8 button head bolts. We're going to thread those right into the bumper. Now you want to go ahead and get all 6 of them started, and then you can go ahead and tighten those down, hold that piece in place. So next up, we need to install the hardware for these bumper support brackets here. So in order to do that, we have to drill a 3/8 hole on each side. So we're just going to use this hole that's already in the bracket here to align where we want our drill bit to go. We're just going to drill a hole right through this little body mount bracket here. All right, so you're going to want to go ahead and drill that hole one on each side of the bumper there. Then we're going to take our 3/8 by 1 grade 8 bolt with a 3/8 flat washer, and we're going to put that in through the hole in the front. Now typically there's a space between this bracket and that body mount, so we take one of these big 1/2 inch flat washers, slide it in between just to take up that space. In there. And then on the back side, you're going to put another 3/8 flat washer, 3/8 lock washer, and the nut. Get in here. Now it is pretty tight. There's not a whole lot of room to get all of that back in between the body mount bushing and the bracket, but there should be just enough to get all the hardware on there, and then you can go ahead and tighten down those bolts. So after you get your hardware all tightened down on these bumper support brackets here, next we need to get the frame support brackets installed. So these wrap around the front of the bumper, and the studs go through these holes here. These two holes on the bottom are where the sway bar mounts, so we need to remove our sway bar, and if you have a remote reservoir for your shock, we need to move that mount and get all of that out of the way so we can start getting this put into position. So we've got our sway bar unbolted and our reservoir mount. We also need to take these plastic plugs out of the frame because we have a big 1/2-inch bolt that needs to go through the frame right here. So you just kind of get underneath with a screwdriver, and then there's one on the other side of that hole too. So we put it through from this side, and then you just pop that plastic plug out of the inside of the frame. You'll want to do that on both sides. Okay, so reservoir mounts can make these kind of tricky. So if you do not have a remote reservoir, the install is pretty simple for these frame support brackets. You just want to put it over the bumper studs here and get it into position there. You can see where it would line up with the big hole where we have a 1/2-inch bolt that goes through there. Then you need to reinstall your sway bar using the original bolts right into the threaded holes down in the bottom of the frame. You want to make sure that this bracket is pushed all the way back as tight as you can get it before you tighten these bolts. And then you'll put on your nuts here and tighten that down. Now, if you have reservoir brackets to deal with, that can be kind of a different story, and they're all made differently and they all mount in different ways. So this one here is a Dobinson's mount, and it looks like it's thin enough and low profile enough that we can actually put it on the frame first and then put our support bracket right over the top, and we'll be able to put our bolts in and install everything like we normally would. Now, I've also had other types that I've had to put the reservoir on the outside of the frame support bracket. So I've done it like that as well, put it on the outside and then install the bolts. It kind of depends on how wide the holes are, how much adjustment you have in your reservoir bracket. Sometimes you have to open up the holes a little bit with a die grinder or something to give you a little bit more room to get those bolts into the bottom. So for this application today, we're going to put our reservoir mount on first and then our frame support bracket. So we were able to get our frame support bracket all put in place. It's just about finished up. So like I mentioned before, we put the reservoir mount behind the frame support bracket. We got our sway bar bolted back into position and our nuts out here on the bumper studs. So just a couple things to keep in mind too when you're tightening all this stuff down. You want to make sure that you do not tighten the sway bar all the way or these all the way first, because you want to make sure that the bracket is pushed back all the way and tight to the frame as far as it can be before tightening any hardware. Sometimes you can tighten these bolts and this bracket will be too far forward and you'll have a big gap here, and you do not want to try and tighten that down just using the nuts. You'll want to readjust it, push it back, and make sure it's nice and tight against the frame. Now we're going to have to open up the frame just a little bit right here with a die grinder to get our 1/2-inch bolt through the frame and bolt all this together. Then we'll be done with that part. As I mentioned, depending on what type of bracket you have, you may or may not have to do that. And depending on the thickness of your bracket and how everything layers together, you also may have to get a longer 1/2-inch bolt to put through the frame there to reach all the way through and be able to snug it down. So a lot of options there depending on what setup you have, but we're going to get this opened up and then put our 1/2-inch bolt in and we'll be all finished up. All right, so we just finished up installing our frame support brackets. One thing to note on those, when you do put that 1/2-inch bolt through the frame and you snug that down, it does not need to get very tight because it will start to crush the frame rail in if you continue to tighten it. So just take a look on the inside, you'll start to see the frame kind of bow in a little bit, and you don't want to go any tighter than that. So once those are finished up, you want to just go through and double check all your mounting bolts, make sure your skid plate is reattached and everything's tightened down, and then the install of your Rock Runner Series front bumper should be complete.